text, upper elementary PDP. Our objectives for this session is that you'll leave able to articulate the process by which we plan for student discussion of text, be prepared to execute your think, turn, talk discussion questions and exemplar responses, and learn talk moves to further support student discourse around text read. Our big goal being that you'll leave able to execute great discussions about text with your students. If you're visual and want to see where we're going with our session today and your week 2 lessons, we're going to be analyzing and internalizing the areas of think, turn, talk prompts and during reading and the post-reading section, as well as the shared reading methods for pre, during, and post, which are still very similar to what we've done for our teacher models for week 2. The do now, since we're on our Edpuzzle, you're going to pull up these materials in order to use them quickly during our session. You'll need your week 2 lesson plan for PDP. You'll need the Gossip Monster story that we've been using to plan with. You'll need the effective PDP lesson plan checklist, the talk moves handout that we'll be referencing, pushing student thinking with questioning handout, and types of shared reading. As I said, we'll be doing that for our PDP lesson today. To start, we're going to talk about how we plan for our think, turn, talk questions, which is really important since we want students to have strong discourse, to be answering those questions that we're setting for them and planning for. So the purpose of questioning falls in 2 primary buckets: deepening understanding and assessing understanding. Take a moment to read these 2 quotes and then answer how you feel that they are different. One of the things we often confuse assessing understanding with deepening understanding. The primary goal of PDP models is to deepen students' understanding of the text that they're reading. While yes, we will assess at the end of the lesson by asking students to write their answer to a CPQ question or answering orally, if we haven't asked good questions along the way to get students to deepen their understanding, we could ask questions but the teacher didn't really know if we understood. When I think about deepening understanding and assessing understanding, I think of like the tree. So deepening understanding, I want to grow the roots. And unless we ask those questions, again, students aren't going to be proficient. They're going to be superficial readers. In contrast, when we're looking at assessing, which is necessary for teachers, we also want to make sure that students are able to explain how they got to that through their assessing from teacher's side. So in order to get those good questions to deepen understanding, we have to start with really strong planning. So I want you to review the lesson you've taught this week and jot down the best questions that you think you've asked in your lessons. Specifically, what were the characteristics of the question that deepened understanding for students? With that in mind, I want you to look at our checklist for effective PDP lesson planning. What did you have in common with the checklist that you noticed from asking great questions? Or what do you notice that was different? One thing that I wanted to note is that when we're planning our think, turn, talks, or even when you've been in the classroom using those, we want to make sure that we're not using more than 2 to 3 because that can impede on students' understanding of text if we're asking too many questions for them to answer during the read. The other thing that we're about to go deeper into is understanding what divergent answers versus extended convergent answers are. That might be something new that you have not seen, and so we're going to spend some time really talking about that to get a clear idea of what questions we're asking in order to get the answers we're looking for from our students. So like I said, most questions fall into 2 primary categories, either convergent answers or divergent. Convergent questions then break down into 2 further, short answer or extended answer, which can be short or long. Specifically, when we're looking at divergent versus convergent questions can have more than one right answer, but there may not even be a right answer. So they can go different ways. Convergent questions, on the other hand, have one right answer, but the answer could be answered short or long. To give a better, clear understanding of this, I wanted to use a text that some of us may be familiar with, or just the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So convergent question would be, why did Goldilocks like baby bear's chair the most? One of the short answers would be like, she liked it. Longer, it was the most comfortable out of the 3 chairs she's tried. Papa Bear's was too hard, Mama Bear's was too soft. Take a moment now and think of another convergent question that would be from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now looking at divergent question. Was Goldilocks right or wrong from entering the Three Bears' house? When we're looking at this question, it can be answered many ways, and there may not even be one right answer. So that's what we're referring to when we think about divergent questions. Take a moment now, and I want you to try and answer what would be a divergent question from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So now we're going to think back to our story of the gossip monster and how we might plan a think, turn, talk for this story. Again, our standard here, making connections to background knowledge to describe a character's emotions and relationships. And our CPQ question, how would Jamie explain her actions towards Adele? Again, when we're thinking about the think, turn, talks, we want to have it leading to students building to be able to answer the CPQ question. If we don't plan well thought out think, turn, talks, then our students aren't going to be able to answer that ultimate question at the end, and that's why we plan so much for these think, turn, talks. I want you to pull up the story now, and I want you to read through and identify where you would have a student stop and think, turn, talk, and list the question that they would be answering. Take a moment now to do that. Great. So one thing that I wanted to know is when I went through the story, where I would pick a think, turn, talk. Specifically, I looked at the 5th page or 5th paragraph, and it said, everyone gasped. I buried my feet into the sand beneath the swings. They couldn't have been what actually had happened. I hadn't seen any black eyes or missing teeth. Dell wasn't at school, though, so maybe he had been expelled. My think, turn, talk would have been, how does Jamie feel after hearing the rumor she started? And I would prompt with why if I needed more. I also want to list the page number because that's a key area of making sure that you have a well thought out think, turn, talk about what page number and what sentence it would be. I also want to note that when you're planning these for your own lesson plans to come, or even the lesson for week 2, you can write down your think, turn, talks on Post-it notes and put that in the story. So then you're not just remembering your CPQ for the end of the read, but also what your think, turn, talks are on each page to make sure you're supporting students to answering that ultimate CPQ at the end. Now I want you to look at your think, turn, talk for your week 2 lesson plan. And I want you to think about it, what edits you would need to make a strong think, turn, talk for you to execute in your lesson. Now we're going to talk about planning think, turn, talk exemplar responses. We're not going to spend a whole bunch of time on the planning exemplars because it's very similar to how you would do that for your CPQ exemplars. You're looking at how to plan for what the highest expectation for students to answer. What we're going to do instead is to spend a bulk of that time focusing on how we plan for really good discussion through student moves to deeper understanding to answer those exemplar responses. As we've discussed, our goal is to create a shared meaning through discussion that deepens what we might have gotten just reading alone. The quote here says, readers must engage in active construction of meaning in which they grapple with the text as they analyze and probe. I put a picture here of my students. I often found that when they independently read, yes, they were able to have high fluency, but what they were missing was really strong comprehension and having a dialogue about what they were reading. So my two students here I paired based on level to really help them understand that conversations in the classroom build on students' ability to answer those exemplar responses the way we're seeking them to. So now I want you to reflect on your teaching within the last few days. What strategies worked for you to extend student conversation in the classroom? Take a moment now to answer that. Great. So some of the things that you might have said or noted is that when students were doing the work or sharing their thinking, that's when the best conversations happened. And I want you to keep that in mind today as we move forward looking at that PDP lesson that you're going to be giving. We're going to pull up our Talk Moves handout, as you can see here, to discuss in depth how we're going to increase students' discussion. Specifically, there's 5 ways that we're going to look at, and I want you to take a moment now and look at the slideshow as well as your handout. The 5 that we're looking at is revoicing, repeating some of the students' response to see if it was correct. Repeating, students restating someone else's reasoning. This is important to make sure students are also listening to what others are saying. And also, if a student isn't quite ready to share what they want to say, they're able to restate what someone else had given. Reasoning, asking a student to apply their own reasoning to someone else's answer, so showing agree or disagree would be an example. Adding on, prompting additional or deeper participation from more students. So an example I use in my room, I have my students use their plus sign to say they want to add on to another student's answer, and then I will call on them to say, I'd also like to add on that. That talk moves allow that student to share what they were listening to their partner or the other student in the class, and then extend. Waiting. Wait time is really important, and this creates think time in our rooms, which can seem like, yes, I'm going to commit to that, but when you're in the moment, giving students wait time can be really difficult. And I want you to encourage more than 5 seconds for that student to think. Given that wait time will only improve them to be able to have time to answer your question. I want you to take a moment now after reviewing all of these talk moves. Write down which one you feel like you gravitate towards the most and which one you think you'll need more time and support in doing. Overall, when we use these talk moves, it's so that we minimize teacher talk in order to maximize students' thinking and talking time. So more thinking time and less talking time from the teacher. So we're again going to return to our favorite story, the gossip monster. Yay. We're going to look back at our CPQ about how Jamie would explain her actions towards Dell. And again, our objective is below. This was again our think, turn, talk for how does Jamie feel after hearing the rumors she started and why. While you can't plan for 100% of what will happen in a student discussion, you can focus on the talk moves, and you should note that in your lesson plan of what you should be concentrating on. We're going to be practicing and looking at our lesson for week 2 now of what questions that are listed to extend student discussion and what talk moves we're using to push that. To get some more practice in that, we're going to pull up our pushing student thinking with questions as listed here. I want you to read through this scenario, and I want you to read through the scenario first. I want you to think about what questions would push students' discussion, and how would this strategy be part of your lesson plan. So, answer these 3 questions now in our Edpuzzle. Which questions push students' conversation and thinking from that exercise? What talk moves did you see the teacher using to expand conversation? And specifically, what talk moves would you have used to push JD's thinking at the end of the lesson? So now we've gone through and we've practiced identifying talk moves. I want you to look at your Think, Turn, Talk and think about what other areas you might need to improve for the Think, Turn, Talk portions, as well as the exemplar responses. Take a moment now and enter that into our Ed Puzzle, what you would need to add to improve the Think, Turn, Talk, as well as what other exemplar responses you would expect from your students. We're now going to look at planning for shared reading. We still use the Think, Turn, Talks to discuss and construct meaning as a class, and often we do this through shared reading. We don't do any think alouds, or if we only do, we do one when we're looking at shared reading. We do this because we want there to be less teacher modeling and more student thinking. So however, you have to choose how students will do this in your room. So we're going to be looking at the types of shared reading handout provided. Shared reading, like we stated, there's 5 main types: the echo, choral, close, buddy, whispering reading. Again, the teacher is providing a lot of support for students because the text may be above their level, but I want you to look at these and think about which one you feel like you as a teacher will gravitate more towards, and again, which one you feel like you would need most support in. I do want to provide some suggestions when we're thinking about how to roll out shared reading for students. The first being that if the text seems somewhat challenging, you may want to go for choral reading for students. And if you think the text is on level, you may want to move towards echo reading or whisper reading with students. This because they are able to read that independently. When you are planning these though, be clear that you're using MVPT directions so students know explicitly what to look for. One thing I wanted to note is that popcorn reading and round robin reading are not on our list for shared reading types. This is because these are usually embarrassing strategies that students who struggle with reading do not feel comfortable doing. Research has also shown that this does not help students if they are not proficient readers. So we will not be using popcorn reading or round reading. Take a moment now, look back at your shared reading method section of your PDP lesson. Look at what other edits you would need to make and or adding your MVPT directions for your during reading so that students know explicitly what to do. List now in our Ed Puzzle what edits you would make to your week 2 lesson or the MVPT directions to make sure your students know exactly what to do during the during reading time. Now we're going to talk about our planning or post reading. So we've finished reading the text, the students have finished reading the text, and it's like, now what? Pull up your post reading checklist for your PDP lesson. You'll see that the post reading checklist is somewhat short. The bulk of student thinking happens during that reading time. So now we're looking at how we are assessing that student's understanding. And again, I want to note here that students can be showing this through either discussion or writing, and that's a choice that you as the teacher can decide. When we're looking at our post reading, we want to be discussing that CPQ, but we also want to recenter ourselves on that strategy we taught. So during this week, we were looking at our strategy of making connections to background knowledge to describe a character's emotions and relationships. We also will want to think about maybe follow-up questions to the CPQ to ground ourselves and our students back into the strategy we've used. So one of the follow-up questions might be, how did making connections to background knowledge help you answer the CPQ today? These connections are really important for students to not only answer the question that we're asking for their comprehension, but making connections to strategies so that they'll be successful in using this again. Finally, looking at our post reading for our PDP lesson, I want you to look at that now and add any edits you think that would improve the post reading, whether that be your MVPT directions on how students are responding to the text, so that you are clear on what it should look like for your post reading section of your lesson. And you did it. You have now reflected on your entire PDP lesson that you'll be executing for week 2, and you've internalized it, ready to stand up and execute for our students. So proud of you, and I can't wait to see you do it in the classroom.